introducing him, and then I'll give him the floor, and once the talk is over, we'll open the discussion so that anyone who wishes to ask questions or share reflections can do so. Raül, whom I imagine many of you already know, holds a degree in economics from the Autonomous University of Barcelona and has completed 2 doctoral degrees, one in international relations at Autonomous University of Barcelona and another in education and sports sciences at Ramon Llull University. He's also a writer, analyst and Catalan politician, and currently he's a professor at the Faculty of Psychology, Education and Sports Sciences at Ramon Llull University, where he teaches in several undergraduate courses, postgraduate programs, and master's degrees. His areas of interest include peace building, republicanism, international relations, and sport as a tool for development and social cohesion. And today he will share with us his reflections based on his personal and political experience. So Raül, thank you so much for being here with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Actually, if you allow me, I will stand. Is it on? Is it on? Thank you. If you allow me, bon dia a tothom, primer. Gràcies per venir. Good morning, everybody. I will stand because actually there is a risk. There is so many people in the back that if I don't stand, probably you will be completely confused of what I'm going to make. Because what I propose you to do today is basically a kind of a journey. I don't know what expectations you come here with, but I really wish to somehow provoke a bit of, let's say, not only reflection, but even questions, which is the most important thing that we are supposed to do in a university like this one. Actually, Pep, can we start with the presentation? What I offered you yesterday was St. Jordi. For the foreigners, I have the perception that you already know how important is St. Jordi, St. George for that country, for that society. We talk about literature, we talk about books, we talk about histories. That's what I'm supposed to make today, one history. Not a book, obviously, but we will use the narrative of the books, of the novels, in order to explain the journey that I am entitled to start with. You will see that we start with travel all along the history of Europe. I'm not going to speak about the history of Europe in, let's say, technical and academical terms, but more as a vivid story, as something that we are living in present, but we are supposed to live in future, and that is your future responsibility. It's a journey through democracy, power, and obviously the concept of Europe itself. But let me start with a prologue. I know here there are students from the global politics degree and there are students from journalism. And this is basically a message for both of you. Those who are supposed to be acting as actors, as main responsible map makers, as we will see at the end, but also those who are supposed to explain this to the rest of the world. And both are fundamental, are important. So I'll start with the prologue. There are journeys that one chooses and journeys that actually they chose you. And mine began with a name my own, that I heard spoken aloud in the classroom hallway. I've been told Raül Romeva is coming to give a lecture. And then the answer of the other student is, who? Raül Romeva, the politician. The politician. That's probably as how many of you know me. The tone was casual. It's not a problem with the tone, but the label struck me, and that's why I decided to make that speech. The politician, not the swimmer, not the peer researcher, not the writer, not the teacher, not the professor, not the father, not the prisoner. The politician label. The man who's read more books than bills and written more pages than press releases. He was a man with malaise, that is true, but he echoed nonetheless a narrowing of identity, a simplification of the complex, a summary of a life in just one line, actually in one word. That moment, that label, was when I felt to pull to write this. Because before the politician, and that's the travel, that's the journey I'm willing to give you, there was a traveler. There was a why. And before the traveler, there was a citizen. And before even that, though I didn't yet know the term at the time, there was an idiotès. In ancient Greece, for those who don't know it, idiotès, idiota, idiot, idiotès, the origin of the term, was not an insult, was basically a condition. Someone who refused to engage in public affairs, who lived only for themselves. Selfish person, probably you would say today. The private man, the private person in a world that needed public minds. The one who looked away when agora, the place where things were discussed, cried out. I have never felt comfortable with that silence. Not as a boy diving into swimming pool, chasing breathlessness. Not as a young man walking through refugee camps in Bosnia, listening to mothers grieve for countries lost and sons never found. Not as a researcher decoding conflict theories, or as a father decoding fears of his children. Not even in the dry halls of parliament, or in the still echo of a prison. Every step I've taken, whether in corridors of power or in cells in concrete, has been a rejection of that silence. This is the map that I now unfold. Not in a linear one, but one with clear borders. More like a mariner's chart drawn with ink and weather, where islands shift and monsters hide beneath names like populism, simplism, or disaffection. Take note of these words for you, future journalists. More like a mariner's undiscovered journey, where storms come dressed as loss, and lighthouses are built by citizens with nothing but convictions in their hands. This is not a confession. It is not a memoir. It is a journey. And like all real journeys, it is a part testimony, part terrain, and part truth-seeking. The why. The more important question you, whatever you do in your life, are supposed to ask yourself. This journey is not going to be easy, no fast, no painless, but nevertheless, it is inevitable. For the Europe we inhabit is no longer a safe harbor. It drifts between the ghost of its promises and the gravity of its fears. It navigates storms it swore it had weathered: rearmament, radicalization, retreat into borders, and slogans. And yet, there are still hands on deck, still eyes on the horizon, still voices like yours, like mine, like ours, who refuse to become idiotès and choose instead to remain citizens. This is our journey, a journey across 3 scales towards one horizon. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Traveler. There are, by the way, for those who are starting journalism, this is narrative creating, the importance. I'm pretty much sure you have read Noah Harari, the importance of creating a narrative. So this is why I beg you, I invite you, I ask you to understand this as a story, as a narrative that has a why behind. Chapter 1, The Traveler. There are voyages that begin at sea and others that begin in silence. Mine began underwater. I was not born into politics. No one is. I was born into movement, into the chloranite stillness of swimming pool, where the only way forward was breathless, rhythmic, and solitary. There, as a boy, I learned to face the paradox of resistance, that going faster sometimes means holding still. That progress, like breath, must be managed, or it drowns you. I was also born into books. You know what's a book? Something that is something disappearing from our libraries, from our houses, but still important. I was born into books. I learned the weight of a good question and the value of a well-folded map. That is what we in the university are supposed to accompany you in your personal journey. I read not to escape, but to understand. Not just the world, but its mechanisms. Why do wars erupt what they do? Why do people obey? Why do they flee? Why do they remain silent? That hunger took me from the pools. It led me to Bosnia, not as a soldier, but as a UNESCO field officer, arriving just after the fire had dimmed, but long before the ashes had cooled. The war in Bosnia, 90s, you were not even born then, had ended in the formal sense, but its bounds were fresh, its silences, the importance of the silences, were louder than its guns. I worked in education, in memory, in peace building, and I discovered something both devastating and galvanizing. Peace is not the absence of war. It is the presence of justice. And this is the most important lecture you can get from any conflict zone you have been in. And justice, I saw, was missing, is missing. Not because people were evil, but because because the structures were tired, fragile, cowardly. And when I mean structures, I don't mean only Bosnian structures. I mean European structures. Let's not forget what had happened in the 90s in order to understand what is happening today. You name it, Gaza, Ukraine, whatever you want to call it. People who had once believed in Europe now whispered doubts about it. Not because they hated democracy, but because democracy had forgotten their names. The worst thing any democratic institution can make, to forget what it's built about, the people. People who once, from Sarajevo to refugee camps across the Balkans, from field reports to sleepless nights filled with cigarettes, smoke and the ash of other people's stories, I walked a path few and map. And the more I listened, the more I realized something dangerous, simple. Silence is a choice. Silence is a choice. I could even say ignorance is a choice. And not choosing is also a choice. Let me rephrase it as well. And choosing to ignore is a choice. Not willing to know is a choice. Not being interested in to know what is happening around the world is a choice. It's not a condition. You have the right to make other choices. Basically, asking questions. Basically, asking yourself why. But this was not enough, so I kept navigating. I studied. I trained. I sought to learn how peace is made, how rights are defended, how institutions are built. I didn't do it for a job. I did it because citizenship, in its truest form, demands both courage and competence, will and capabilities. I pursued not one, but 2 doctorates, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. In international relations, to understand the world as it fights, or the second one in education and sports sciences, to understand how the world learns or refuses to. And still something was missing. So I wrote essays, books, articles, thoughts I didn't know where else to put. And slowly, almost reluctantly, I entered to the current of what people call public life. Not because I wanted power, but because I believed I had no right to complain if I wasn't willing to step forward. The opposite of Idiotès, the Republican perception of democracy. That is how I became a politician. I became a politician. But I never stopped being a traveler. Along this path, people began to forget the swimmer, the reader, the researcher, the writer, the professor. They saw only the title, Raül Romeva, the politician. As if one role could erase all the others. I'm 54. Only 12 years, 12 out of those 54 in an institutional political role. And yet, many still call me the politician. And no, I am not the politician. Words matter. I have done politics. Not quite the same. Michael Phelps, who I expect you know it, once said, swimming is not what I am, is what I do. In the same way, politics is not about who you are. It's about what you do. And more importantly, why you do it. That distinction, invisible to many, I expect and I hope and I wish not to you as future and relevant actors in whatever sphere you are. That distinction, invisible to many, has been my compass ever since. Do you really want to know who I am? Don't look at Wikipedia or many other places. Go to primary sources. Do you want to understand the world? Don't go to TikTok. Go to primary sources. Read books. Ask people. Make questions. Forget about the nets. That is simply the tip of the iceberg. That signals the way, but this is not the way you must follow. Have I learned something as a traveler? Sure. Among other things, one very important thing. The media, and that's important for you, the media do not always tell the truth. Sometimes yes, obviously, but do not always tell the truth or all the truth. They simplify, they label, and in doing so, they distort reality. But I also discovered another thing, even more important. Complexity is not a weakness. It is the foundation of truth, and more important, of democracy. Chapter 2, the witness. The first time I stepped into the European Parliament, I did not feel triumphant. I felt curious. It was 2004, quite a long time ago already. The air in Brussels was heavy with optimism, that strange and fragile optimism that follows after walls have fallen and markets have been liberalized. The European project, they said, was entering a golden age. Countries once divided by war were now exchanging Erasmus students and voting on fisheries regulations. It was beautiful in its way. It was nice. Bureaucratic, yes, for sure, but beautiful. I was elected as a member of the European Parliament, representing voices often unheard. I arrived not with illusions, but with determination. I wanted to make Europe real, not just as a market, but as a space of dignity, justice, and memory. I believed it was possible, and at times it was. In those early years, I saw how legislation could shape lives, how minority languages could be defended, how human rights could be whispered into directives. I worked across borders, built alliances, spoke not only in Catalan, Spanish, English, or French, but in the common language of democratic decency. But the longer I stayed, the more I noticed something else. There were cracks, not in the marble, but in the mission. Laws were passed not because they were just, but because they were convenient. Resolutions failed, not because they were wrong, but because they were inconvenient. In times of comfort, institutions, and that speaks also for the European institutions, speak of values. In times of crisis, like the one we're living in right now, they speak of interests. Important for you to know that, whether you are in or you are talking about it. And soon the storm clouds came. Because without values, lost drift like vessels without a compass, caught in the currents of inertia, or worse still, wielded as anchors of exclusion. So spoke the magistrate of outer provinces before vanishing into the midst of the Reform archipelago. That's to put a bit of theatric way to understand it. And thus I witnessed the slow but steady rise of the far right. What had once been contained in fringe newsletters and angry rallies outside the building, there, it was their problem, not our problem, it was their problem. They were outside, now sat in the hemicycle. And they are not few, they are many, they are a lot. Suited briefcases and increasingly emboldened. What shocked me was not their noise outside or inside the buildings, but the silence of those who should have stood against it. There is a moment familiar to all who watch democracies falter when the center begins to lean, when it begins to excuse the inexcusable, tolerate the intolerable, not out of hatred, but out of fear, or fatigue, or cynism. I saw this happen, not in one vote, not in one speech, but as a drift. Still I work, still I believed, still I work now, still I believe now, today. But then came the day when I crossed a line, no moral, not ethical, but political. And I accepted the new role, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Catalan government. But what is a minister when the state refuses to acknowledge your existence? I was a diplomat without a country, a representative without a flag. In the eyes of some, I was a threat. In the eyes of others, an irritant. In my own eyes, I was doing what I had always done, defending democracy, this time from its margins. But democracies, so I learned, have a dark reflex. When they feel threatened, they do not always strengthen their commitment to dialogue. Sometimes they retreat into force. And so I found myself in prison, not for stealing, not for violence, but for organizing a referendum, for enabling people to vote, for asking questions. Exactly the same thing that I'm asking you to do. As it's one thing to believe in democracy when you wear a street, but it is a completely different thing when you wear prison clothes. What I've learned as a witness, many things as well, indeed, but among them one very important. Repression doesn't silence ideas. It reveals fear. Here and anywhere else in Europe or in the world. As a political prisoner, I understood how democracies can turn on their own principles when legitimacy is inconvenient. No need to look here. Look around you, in Europe, in Italy, Hungary, the center of Europe, but look at the United States, whatever you want to call it, Argentina. Inside those walls, I had time to think, too much time. And I realized that prison is not the opposite of parliament. It is part of the same spectrum. It is what happens when power refuses to listen, when institutions forget their mission, to listen to the people, to talk to the people, to understand what the people want, and when values became optional. Chapter 3, The Guardian. Some journeys don't end, simply change names. I am no longer only a traveler, nor merely the witness. Today I write here and I stand here in front of you as something else. As a guardian. Not of tradition, not of nostalgia, but of something far older and far more delicate, democracy. And I do not guard it alone. I write this at a time when Europe once again stands on a cliff's edge, not because of a single enemy, nor a single event, but because of a drift, a slow, silent, dangerous drift. The sea is rising and the lighthouse is dimming. Let me name the tide, the triad of democratic erosion. Democracy is not always attacked with tanks or coups. Sometimes it is eroded slowly, surgically from within. And now I come to you. Over the years, I have seen three currents swell beneath our democracies. Number one, the communication simplism, where headlines replace histories, where outrage is rewarded over nuance, where complexity, the mother of truth, is treated as elitism. The political populism, where emotion trumps fact, where anger is mobilized but never healed, where promises are shouted but policies are silenced. And social narcissism, where the we becomes the me, where the solidarity is ridiculed, where the ego claims more rights than responsibilities. This triad is the iceberg beneath the surface. Above the waterline, we see only invisible peaks. Anti-politics dressed as common sense, far-right resurgence cloaked in flux and fear, but beneath it is a quieter cultural forces that erode the keel of the ship. What is Europe facing? I have traveled across Europe, not just as a representative, but as a father, as a swimmer, as a prisoner, as a friend. And I have seen how many storms we are now sailing into. Let me name it. Rearmament and the death of post-war pacifism, tariff wars, economic tensions, and deglobalization, a credibility crisis in the EU institutions, rule of law backsliding in member states, polarization and simplism in every national debate, the explosion of misinformation ecosystems, the slow betrayal of the Green Deal by short-termism, the collapse of trust in media, in leadership, in one another. And yet the real risk is not the storm. Let me put it very clear. Is the resignation of the crew. And thus, after being a traveler and witnessing the beast from within, I understood how important it was and how important it still is to be guardian. That is why I wrote a solemn vow. The guardian's vow says it. I do not claim to have the solution, but I know what I will not do. I will not look away. I will not reduce people to enemies. I will not surrender complexity. I will not romanticize silence or blindness, I could add. Chapter 4. The horizon ahead. The horizon ahead. New maps for an unfinished journey. When I first stood before you at the beginning of my speech and shared the path that had brought me from swimming lanes to parliamentary debates, from refugee camps to prison walls, I invited you into a journey. Not just mine, but potentially yours, ours, the we. A journey that marked by storms, maps, and mirrors. We spoke of idiotès, of citizenship, of democracy, not as something given but built painfully, joyfully, and collectively. It is not for free. It is not for granted. It has a price. It has a cost. And we have a responsibility to keep it in. Now, as we approach the final stretch of this shared course, I want to return to you not with memories, not my memories, but with questions. And that is my, let's say, invitation, my proposal. Because if chapter 1, it was about movement, and chapter 2, the witness, it was about witnessing, and chapter 3, it was about guarding, then what it remains now is orientation. We know where it comes from, but where are we going to? The act of looking forward, vision. This is not a conclusion, this is an happening. You are not merely students of global studies. You are future diplomats, researchers, journalists, analysts, teachers, mayors, activists, whatever. You are or you can become. Choice is your choice. You can choose not to choose. You can choose to remain silent. You can choose to remain blind. It's your choice. It's not a condition. It's your decision. You decide whether you are going to be or not. But you can become map makers. And what Europe needs now, more than ever, are those who can read this turbulent horizon and not retreat from it. Those who dare to make meaning in complexity, who don't flinch when the winds rise. So today, I will not offer you a roadmap. I offer you a weather report. It's you who are going to make the roadmap. I'm just giving you how the weather is going to be. And now you decide whether to sail it or not. And whether you want to navigate it or not. Choice. You have the choice. Because Europe, the very space you are studying, living in, shaping, is facing a confluence of different storms. They come from different fronts: geopolitical, digital, social, economic, environmental. But they meet in a single place: your future, our future. Let us then together name them, not to despair, but to prepare. Not to shrink, but to step up. Geopolitics and security, the shifting borders of certainty. Once upon a time, the world's security in Europe evoked memories of war and promises of peace. Today, it echoes again in procurement plans, military drills, and escalating budgets. The post-war pacifist consensus, fragile, flawed, but precious, valuable, is unraveling under a renewed rearmament wave. The war in Ukraine did not just redraw borders, it redrew assumptions. Suddenly, energy was no longer a matter of economics. It became a weapon. Europe's deep-rooted energy dependency on autocratic regimes exposed its geopolitical vulnerability. Gas pipelines, once branded as symbols of interdependence, turned into checkpoints of strategic risk. In this new world, alliances are blotched. NATO, long thought to be in political retirement, now flexes its muscle again. But is this a glimpse of the future, or is simply a mirage? The strategic ambiguity between siding with the United States or seeking greater autonomy leaves Europe navigating a sea without a compass. Meanwhile, the fortress tightens. Border externalization deals with third countries to manage migration is an uncomfortable euphemism. It exposed Europeans' moral dilemmas to deserts, detention centers, and forgotten islands. And while soldiers train on land and jets fly overhead, the next attack may not come with noise, but with a code. Cybersecurity has become a silent battleground where infrastructure, elections, and identities are all vulnerable to invisible invasions. Economy and trade, beneath the surface of prosperity. Europe was once the epicenter of global trade. Today, it finds itself caught on the chessboard of shifting tariffs and fractured alliances. Trade conflicts with the United States, with China, and even with the post-Brexit UK are not mere economic disputes. They are contests of power, regulation, and sovereignty. One particularly tense front is the transatlantic relationship. Much of what irritates figures like Donald Trump about the European Union is not simply economic competition, but our so-called excess of regulation, especially in areas like environmental policy, the Green Deal, digital security, and privacy, such as the e-Privacy Directive, the Digital Services Act, or the AI Act, and food safety, notably regarding the GMOs. It is not far-fetched to imagine a future where Europe is pushed to negotiate tariff reductions in exchange for regulatory concessions, opening the door for American corporations to enter the European market with fewer control. These are the kinds of reflections that we will need to grapple with as we, and especially you, the younger generations, navigate the complexities of tomorrow's economic diplomacy. Europe's economic future hinges on innovation. But here too, the pace is still slow. In AI, in artificial intelligence, in green technologies, in strategic digital infrastructure, we lag behind. Others build, we regulate. Inflation creeps into daily life. A cost-living crisis turns supermarket receipts into political statements. When people struggle to heat their homes or feed their families, basic needs, democracy weakens, not in law, but in heart, in trust, in conviction, in values. And while some regions benefit from post-pandemic recovery, others are left behind. The historic gaps between North and South, East and West, now risk becoming permanent fractures. These inequalities fuel resentment and to give oxygen to extremism. Lastly, the COVID crisis reminded us of a hard truth. Global supply chains, once celebrated as miracle of efficiency, are also sources of profound fragility. What breaks far away is felt immediately here. Democracy and institutions. The hollowing of the agora. Democracy, like the sea, often looks calm before the storm, but under the surface, it is eroding. Citizens across Europe question the legitimacy of institutions, not because they are anti-democratic, but because they feel unrepresented, unheard, unseen. The European project, for many, feels like a conversation held in a language they were never taught. We see a rule of low backsliding, with countries refusing to abide by judicial norms or suppressing media independence. And the Union's mechanism to respond remain sluggish, fearful of confrontation. In parallel, the rise of executive overreach, governments ruling by decree, bypassing legislatures, is becoming normalized. Emergency becomes routine. Checks and balances become optional. And at every level, transparency fades. Policy becomes process. Language becomes jargon. Decision becomes distance. And the citizens become spectator. Social fabric and identity, the fractured mirror. European societies are not just diverse. They are pluralistic. Not the same thing. Not the same thing. But this richness is under train. Polarization is no longer the exception. It is the algorithm. That's what we get. That's what you get all the time in your Instagram accounts, TikToks, Twitter, X, wherever you use it. That's polarization. That's fragmentation. The public debate has become performance. Compromise is framed as betrayal. And across the continent, radicalization festers in echo chambers and on sidewalks alike. The far right, once contained to the margins, once their problem, not our problem, once their problem, now sits in parliaments and ministries in the mainstream. It speaks of order, pride, of taking back control, and many listen not because they are hateful, but because they are disoriented. Migration becomes the scapegoat. Not the wars that caused it, not the economic system that exploited it, not the policies that mishandle it, just the people, reduced to flow statistics and threats. Meanwhile, media trust collapses. Disinformation spreads faster than facts. And identity, instead of connecting us, is wielded like a sword, not to protect, but to divide. Climate and environment between the promise and the collapse. The European Green Deal was meant to be transformative. And in its vision, it is, in the vision, on the paper, on the words. But vision do not change the world. Implementation does. Progress has been patchy. Resistance grows from sectors who feel excluded from the transition, farmers, factory workers, entire regions. Without just transitions, the green cause will lose its base before it finds its footing. At the same time, climate denialism creeps back, now dressed in economic pragmatism or populist resentment. But nature is now waiting. Water stress, biodiversity collapse, and rising temperatures are already here. We speak of future generations, but the consequences are already falling on today's youth, on us, on you. We must ask, will this be the century we mitigate, or the century we regret? Again, the why, again, the choice, again, your opportunity to change it. Digital and technological sovereignty, the silent colonization. We live in the most connected era of human history. And yet, Europe owns none of the cables. There is no European Google, no European Amazon, no European TikTok, and while we draft some of the world's best regulations, others draft the technology. AI regulation, one of the most urgent frontiers, remain partial. Ethics alone are not enough when algorithms evolve faster than laws. Privacy, once a core European value, is now traded. Not just by corporations, but often by citizens themselves unknowingly. The digital self is unprotected. We now live in an ecosystem of misinformation, where the most outrageous voices wins, where lies go viral, and facts lag behind. That's your responsibility, that's our responsibility, that's our choice. And all this algorithmic bias makes decisions about loans, about jobs, about justice, without ever being seen. Closing the map, closing the compass, sorry. Toward democracy is not to preserve it in a museum. Democracy doesn't disappear overnight. It does slowly. When people stop showing up, stop caring, stop resisting. It is to practice imperfectly every day. It is to defend disagreement, to respect doubt, to value protest. Democracy is not a place. It is a verb. And we are all responsible for conjugating it in the present tense. Democracy is not inherited. It is built. And built again, and again, and again. It is the lighthouse that must be light anew. Each generation, each storm. And if you ask me what this costs, I will not lie. Defending democracy isn't easy. It's not fast. It's rarely painless. And yet, it is inevitable. Because, that's a very important because, the alternative, silence, fear, resignation, it is far more dangerous, worst, it is unthinkable. And because there are still maps to draw, seas to cross, bridges to build, because the journey, yours, mine, ours, is not over, we, not me, we are not entering a world of answers. We are entering a world of unprecedented complexity, a world of questions, a world of whys. But we also have unprecedented tools, languages, networks, mobility, curiosity, courage. I do not ask us to solve everything. I ask us to care, to think beyond the algorithm, to question the labels, to stand sometimes alone for what we know is right. We may not change the world, but we can change our coordinates. It's a choice, an individual choice, your choice, our choice. And from there, change the way we navigate together. And so navigating together, we reach the end of that journey. Or perhaps, should I say, to be continued. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Raül, for this insightful and thought-provoking talk. We'll now open the floor to the audience. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question or share a reflection?
Yes. But starting, if there is no questions in a conference, that I am asking you to make questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Raul. Hey, yes?
It's on, it's on.
It's on, okay. Thank you very much, Raul, for these insights and for this speech, which is very interesting and very provocative. I have two questions in order to give you some ideas in order to do more reflections. First of all, I would like to do a reflection. No, I would like to ask you a reflection of how the current European institutions can deal with these armamentistic policies and these new geopolitical threats regarding how the NATO has to be in the future. As you know, the European policy of defense has been always a big hotspot in the European institutions, and I don't know how the new European Commission can deal with this and how the governments can deal with this. So this is for the students of global studies. For the students of journalism, it's maybe a more simple question, which is how you have deal with journalists during all your life, and above all, which recommendations could give to journalists in order to deal with, sorry for the label, the politicians, and above all, how do you think that journalism is evolving in this new world full of complexity? Thank you very much.
Two very good questions. Thank you very much. It is on? Is it? Okay. Well, thank you very much. The two questions are, let's say, relevant indeed for the two kind of audiences we have today. Number one, on the armament, let's say, race as we are now facing it. Well, there is several points to say. Number one, it's very difficult to swallow that somebody says that we're going to raise the budget in armament without detraying money from other parts of the budget. That is difficult to understand. And even if some governments, they tell us, no, don't worry, we increase the money we spend in armament, but we are not going to touch the other parts of the budget. That's impossible. That's not possible. It's simply physically and economically not possible. So if you put more money there, that means that you put less money in some other places. That's numbers. That's economy. And even if you increase the budgets in global terms, directly or indirectly, you are doing this. So actually, more money there means less money in other places. That's by definition. So number one, there is something that we cannot simply accept as such, is that we put the public money in places basically expecting this is not going to affect other let's say other priorities. What is happening right now? If you are aware of how the narrative is being built, is now what we perceive is a kind of a narrative that is made by the institutions, but also by some journalists, some journals, or some newspapers, or some media, in order to make us believe that we really need it. Once you accept this is needed, then there is less, let's say, controversy. So how do you build that need? Creating fear, building enemies, labeling. And that is what basically has been all along history justifying all the military increases all over the times. So this is what we are now. And as citizens, we have to question ourselves, why? Number one. Number two, on that aspect too, the huge difference, there is many differences, but one of the huge difference in between the United States and the European Union is that the United States has one president that takes one decision, and the country is one. The European Union is 27 states, 27 head of states, 27 governments that respond to 27 public opinions, with 27 perceptions, visions, ideologies, political priorities. Yes, there is the president of the Commission, there is the president of the Council, but still, those who decide is the European Council, basically the head of states, led, if you want, by the president, but mainly the main governments leading the European Union, and not even all at the same level. Some are more powerful than others. Some are more, let's say, more heard and more followed than others. You name it, Germany, France, obviously. In sometimes Spanish and Poland are also somehow, and Italy is also relevant. So that's second problem. Third problem, obviously the perception narrative, again, Noah Harari, the perception of risk, the perception of threats is completely different depending on where you live in Europe. It's not the same to live in the south than to live in the north. It's not the same to live, let's say, close to the border with Russia than far away from that. It's not the same. As it's not the same to understand how important it is to manage migrations movements if you live in the Mediterranean coast that if you are living in the, let's say, in the northern countries. It's completely different perspective. So from that perspective, and knowing that the governments are following the public opinions of the government, of their countries, the perception is fundamental. And from that perspective, we need to understand, and going back to the question, that this discussion, this new discussion about the rearmament of Europe is not only about investing in the army industry. It's about redefining completely the core, the idea, the principle of the European Union as such. So it's not about a budget. It's not even about an industrial policy. It's much more than this. It's about reinventing the global idea of the European Union. And for those who have forgotten, the European Union itself is a peace resolution exercise. It was born, it was created, it was invented, it was, let's say, led at the time after the Second World War as an exercise of, as long as we share objectives, as long as we have the same common purposes, we have less incentive to fight each other. After the Second World War, France and Germany were complete enemies. The European Union was invented to make this past and to start building a new future. It's a completely different story. Are we going to do something of that level beyond the European Union? That's the question. And how is this going to affect not only to the military budgets or to the budgets as such, but how is this going to affect to the credibility of the institution as such, which is to me much more important than the number, than the figure, than some millions or millions or billions of euros. That is more important on that aspect. Yes, you can simply pretend to buy Trump's arguments. When Trump say, well, I'm not going to save Europe anymore when there is a problem around the world. What does it mean? When the United States saved Europe of something. Saved. That's a very presumptuous way to put it. It may help, but every time that the United States have intervened in an international conflict, every time they had an interest behind. And that is important to know and to recognize and to admit. And sometimes it was maybe for good, and sometimes maybe not that good. So let's not, let's say, be prisoners of that narrative. And second, well, there is another debate which is also within the European institutions, shall we invest in an European defense policy, or shall we invest in 27 national defense policies? Because that's exactly what is at the stake at the European Parliament and the institutions. There are governments that are very much in favor of increasing the military expenditures, the military budget, the military, let's say, funds, but not at the European level, at the national level. So yes, if it's national, not if it's European. And on the other way around, you have other political groups who say, yes, if it's for an European army, but not if it's for the national armies. Well, that's Europe. That's European Union. That's what we are facing. So as a global studies students and future map makers, as a journalist that are supposed to understand and to explain and to help us society to follow what is going on. Question number one, what is this really about? Ask yourself, is this about money? Is this about simply reformulating the industrial policy? Which industrial policy? Which purposes? Who is going to be benefiting from that? And who is going to be, let's say, put aside with that policy? Question number two, very interesting one, because actually that's when I started preparing this conference, I remember I was speaking with Joan a school years before. I was remembering a previous experience I had in that university. I was invited to participate in a class of political journalism. I think it's called that way. And I was invited to make a kind of a simulation of what, let's say, a press conference could be. And my first question to the students, it was 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 4, I don't remember, but that's time is running. My first question is, what are you expecting from me? The answer was, well, we want to interview a politician. What does it mean? A politician. What is a politician? It's not the same. It's not the same to interview somebody who is a legislator in the European Parliament, who is making laws at the European level, than to interview somebody who is a local councillor, who is managing local problems. They are two completely different profiles. It's not the same to interview the spokesperson of a political party after the meeting of the national national discussion body, let's say that every week they make in the Monday mornings, that to interview somebody who is been proposed to make a politics role based on his professional background. So my experience has not been very positive, let's say generally speaking, for one thing. There is something I strongly, and from the deepness of my heart, I ask you, I beg you, humanize people, whatever they do. Might be politics, might be journalism, might be business, might be humanize people. People is people, is not labels. People is people, not titles. People is people. Trying to do things better or not that better, but people is people. The first mistake I realize in communication most is there is too much label and too less humanization. And that is a risk. If we dehumanize, and coming from the field of conflicts management, if we start dehumanizing people, is the step before targeting it, before the shooting. And that's not a minor thing. Let me put a comparison, talking about conflicts. You are too young to know what happened in Bosnia for your own experience, or too young to know what happened in Rwanda for your own experience. But you might know it through the nets, through the websites, whatever you want to call it. Why do you think somebody would shoot a person that has been for years his neighbor, killing him or killing a young girl without apparently no specific purpose or danger or threat? There is only one explanation for this, because before that, that person he's shooting at was dehumanized. You first dehumanized, and then you shoot. You first dehumanize, and then you signal, you point at them. And once you are pointed, somebody else can come and shoot at you. It can be a verbal shoot, no problem. It can be an insult. It can be a verbal attack. But sometimes it can be something more dangerous. Why do you think a couple of men or a couple of women are attacked in the, let's say, when they are walking hand by hand or kissing in the public, let's say, space for somebody who is approaching them and hitting them because they are two women or two men kissing? Because they have been previously dehumanized and put in a target. And there is somebody who believes that they are a threat, so I have to attack them. This is what happens with professions. This is what happens with titles. This is what happens with labels, with ideologies, with languages, with origins. This is the Islam problem. This is the Muslims. This is the women's responsibility. This is the journalist's responsibility. Oh, you are a journalist. Oh, come on. You're a danger. You're a problem. Why? So my recommendation, my beg, my wish, if you want to be a real good journalist, humanize. It does not mean that you cannot be critical, even pushing, even, let's say, assertive. It has nothing to do with this. It has to do with the fact that in front of you, you have a person, you have somebody with his personal backgrounds and histories. So, as a summary, stop labeling, start making journalism. More questions? Go ahead.
Bon dia.
Bon dia.
Faré la pregunta en català, si no hi ha inconvenients. Jo, entre totes l'explicació que ens has fet, sí que em quedaria en que, tot i la presó, per convidar els ciutadans de Catalunya a fer un exercici tan democràtic com és anar a votar, segueixes mantenint les teves conviccions i per tant segueixes seguint aquella idea d'aquell 2017 i d'abans del 2017. Llavors jo la meva pregunta seria una mica, clar, quan ens castiguen, com és la presó, normalment és per fer un acte de consciència i en aquest cas l'acte de consciència va ser seguir aquelles mateixes idees i per tant com creus que el compromís... Bueno, m'he apuntat la pregunta durant la... Com es manté el compromís col·lectiu en un moviment que ha estat judicialitzat, que hi ha hagut un desgast col·lectiu social i les divisions internes entre els diferents partits polítics? Sí, aquesta seria la meva pregunta.
Shall I respond in Catalan or in English, Joan? In English? Then I'll respond in English. No. Number one, it hasn't happened here anything different than what it has happened everywhere in the world along history. We are not different. All transitions, all revolutions, all social changes follow the same path, follow the same patterns. They are all difficult, they are all slow, they are all painful. All. We are not different. Sometimes we think we are. Sometimes we think even that we are better. We are not. We are the same that any other society in the world and in the history of life. Exactly the same, for good and for bad. So number one, what is necessary to do to understand this? And this is important in order to, let's say, in order to manage expectations. Frustration is nothing more than a equation. It's the difference in between the expectation and reality. If your expectations are too high and reality is there, your frustration is very high too. So, and that is a tricky part to do. How do I make expectations high enough in order to make me move, but not that high that provoke, in case of not getting them, a frustration too difficult to manage or to live with? That is a personal, individual, long life decision we have to make, individually and collectively. And to me, it's compatible. So, number one, we need vision. Vision is looking ahead. But vision is vision. We cannot confuse vision with expectations in the short, medium, long term. In order to get vision, you need to know that there is a compass, there is some coordinates you have to navigate to. But in order to navigate to that vision, you need to establish some, let's say, periods, some phases. Sometimes those phases are easier, sometimes are not. And sometimes you try to make one step ahead and there is something unexpected, climatology, things that happens around that make this trip more difficult than you expected it to be. If you think that this is basically a message to you saying your vision is wrong, then quit. Go ahead. Then it's time to quit. I understand. If you think that because of that the vision was incorrect, change your path. Move away. Do something else. But if you understand that these circumstances is basically a problem in your travel, in your trip, in your journey, then why you have to stop? It is basically a signal that what you're doing is difficult, is low, and is painful. And this is not me saying this. When I was in Extremadura, in one of the prisons I've been, in Madrid, there was a wall. We were, once a week, we were allowed to go to, let's say, a football sand field in order to make some running. Well, kind of exercise you can do in a prison. In that world, actually, that field was not only for football, it was also for rugby. Rugby in prisons are very important. And in that wall, there was a quote from one man called Nelson Mandela. And the quote is very simple. And probably, I must say, it's probably not even his. Probably somebody wrote to him and he said it. But the quote is basically, the path to freedom everywhere in the world is not easy for anyone. That's simple. So if you are frustrated because everything you do is not easy, move away. Forget it. You are not gonna make anything at all in your life, at all. So do something else. If you understand that the vision, the goal, the coordinates are correct, then you have to admit that there is a price to pay for that. There is a cost to pay. And you have to admit that this price to pay is gonna be on you, not on the others. You have to be in position to pay that price yourself. Because if you simply want that price to be paid for somebody else, then you are not honest on your path. So basically, that's where I am, and where many of us are. Basically, we tried something for conviction, and because the vision was, to me, valid. Again, democracy. And we, some discovered that it's going to be more difficult than expected. And so what? What does it mean? Well, it means simply that you have to insist. That's it. That's it. Nothing more than this. You have to insist. Obviously, then, in that perception, there are two ways to respond. One of my fields of expertise is sport. And one of the things I'm trying to do when I teach international relations is using sport metaphors. And when I'm teaching sport, I'm trying to make them understand how the world is run via sport, so international politics in the sport sphere. In the sport sphere, there are no students of sport. They are professors, but not students of sport, I guess. But in sport philosophy, there's something that is absolutely fundamental. And there is not a phrase that I invented myself. Is probably you know him, Baldano, who was a former coach, and actually he is now, let's say, a commentator in some medias. But he says something that to me very, very, very simple to understand. Those who win learn. Those who fail look for somebody to blame. Again, those who win, the winners, are those who learn. The losers are those who simply look for somebody to blame for their faults, for their problems, for their disasters. That's simple. That's applicable in football, and that's applicable in life. You fail on something. Try to understand why this happened. It was your fault. It was because the circumstances were not the optimal. Then why to blame somebody behind me if the circumstances were? Was because I was not trained enough? Good. Then the answer is very simple. Train more. Train better. Change your tactics. Change your strategy. Change your performance. Learn. If you are a winner, you have to learn. If you are a loser, you always would prefer to find somebody else to blame of your defeats. And that is, again, applicable in sport life, but is applicable in life and in international relations, in politics. Very much. So I think, or I prefer, I want, or I wish, I don't know how to put it. My desire, my vision, is that we are a society of winners in the sense of learners. In the sense of learners. I lost because you missed your shot. Okay, good enough. But this is not going to make you win the next time. I lost because we end the match and we basically bet everything at your last shot. And then you miss it because you're human. But it's not your fault. It's our collective fault because we reached the end of the match in a situation that your shot was decisive. The question is how we can make it in a way that your shot at the end of the match is not decisive. That is learning. That is learning. And that is what we need to do as society. Instead of blaming the last shooter, try to understand what we need to do better next time when we do something similar. That's how I say it. Is that silence optional? Is that silence a choice? I hope not. Go ahead. Yeah, there is a question back.
Hi, now. I would like to ask, in the aspect of journalism again, what would you recommend to the future journalist, apart from being, how to say it, like you said, human and ethical, what more things would you recommend to us? Thank you.
Be curious. Care. Study, read, learn. That's the main thing. You cannot pretend explain if you don't understand. If you want to explain, if you want to help others, that's the role of the journalism, that's the role of the media, to help other parts of the society to understand reality, first you need to understand it. You cannot explain if you don't understand it. And in order to understand, you have to move away from your trench. Socially, we are living in trenches. We're living in bubbles. We are living in closed spheres. And we think the world is the world it comes to us in our algorithm. But this is not the world. This is not the world. This is a part of the world. This is a completely different story. I put that in purpose. I don't know if you understood that message. What do you see here? Now you see the end of the story. But if you haven't seen it, what do you see here? What is that? If there is no more context, you may see a runner, isn't it? A runner. Somebody who has finished the race and is happy, is tired. without the context, you may be completely misinformed. You need the context. You need the why. You need to explain everything. Too many times, this is the highlight. The highlight. You make an interview. You take some phrase of that interview, and you make the highlight of that interview, saying parts of the words that this interviewed person has said. And you make, let's say, catching title or highlights in order to, let's say, to attract the attention of the audience. But most of the times, this is my experience, most of the times, this is not true. Mainly, and let me be very clear that, mainly on the digital media. The clickbait is one of the worst enemies for the journalists we've lived in history. So if one day you are going to work in the digital media, you are going to be asked to do this, because it's not about information, it's about business. It's about making money. And you will make a very good interview with very good questions, with very good answers, and the editor or the owner or whoever is going to make a highlight, a clickbait word or sentence that is going to make your job completely useless. That is the danger we have to be confronted with. Again, it's your choice, it's your decision, you want to play to this or not. I have to be honest, I have definitely declined to offer more. It's difficult because nowadays everything is digital. But I am very, very, very reluctant to offer interviews to digital media. Why? Because you try to explain things. But the digital media are not interested in things to be explained. They're interested into getting people going there, paying, publicity, money. And I might sound a bit harsh. I know it. But you asked me about my experience. That's my experience. So my question to you as future journalists, one of the most important professions, one of the more important roles we need in every society, somebody who explains reality, is care. Be curious. Question yourself. Every time. Everywhere. Why? You might be wrong sometimes. We are all wrong sometimes. But you cannot pretend to explain reality if you don't understand it first. And in order to do this, you need to get out of your trench, of your bubbles. Let me say it in a very clear way. I don't know which media you follow to be informed. Probably everybody follows different media. But my suggestion, you ask me my suggestion, what I would recommend, if you want to be a good journalist, you have to follow all the media, not some, not TikTok, not Instagram. This is not media. This is not information. It's good to follow TikTok in order to know what is happening there, sure. But TikTok is not reality. X is not reality. Instagram is not reality. Your bubble is not reality. Reality is the combination of all this. So my suggestion to any future and currently acting journalist, be curious. Even with those media, even with those sources that you don't share. Your role, your responsibility is to be prepared. Is to know what they say. Otherwise, you are not journalist. You are a completely different thing. And we need good journalists. We need good people who understand reality and who help us to understand the rest of the people of us, who help us to understand the complexity of the world. If you simply want to be somebody who is disseminating some highlights because everybody's us, because everybody says it, to me, you are going to be useless. And you are going to contribute to the drift of this, let's say, crack of democracy we are living in now. So I think that you have a very good opportunity. That's what I tell also my students in the other universities I teach. We have a very good opportunity. We, not you, not we have a very good opportunity of changing this. But the first step to take in order to make this is let's understand that what we get from the media is not that. Sorry, is not that. Most of the times is that. So let's question ourselves what we get and then reinterpret it. I'm not saying this is easy and comfortable. And we could start discussing about the, let's say, the system and how the market is built and how the media companies and the media business is based upon. That is a matter of some let's say courses probably, and certainly it has to. But the first thing is to know that we need to question ourselves. Do not accept this. Go for the global, the whole picture. That's not only for the journalists, also for the global studies. More questions? Hungry?
I have a question.
Sure,
two
go ahead.
questions, Raul. Thinking from a political scientist perspective, what can democratic institutions do to make democracy attractive again? How can they move closer to the citizens? How to make people care about democracy again? What would you tell students of global studies? And also, we've talked about this guardian of democracy, of having a vision and a commitment to democracy. But I was wondering if you could maybe propose some short or medium long-term solutions to the risk that democracy is facing today. And to end on a hopeful maybe note, because when we think about all these storms that the world is facing right now, we may feel anxious and overwhelmed and uncertain about the future, and this may stop us from acting. And I was wondering what tips would you tell our students who are the younger generation and who will be maybe politicians, journalists, and who will work on international relations, on how to navigate this uncertainty and all these storms to not lose hope?
This is the question. This is the question, the problem. Simply, I can basically, in a short way, or the short answer would be, democracy is not granted, but democracy is not for free. So the first mistake we usually commit is to believe that democracy is inherited, and we simply are here to manage it. No, it's not true. Democracy is something that we have to invent and reinvent and build and to rebuild every day, every moment, every place, for everyone. Democracy is a dynamic institution. It's not, I am born in democracy, so everything is done. No way. That's not true. Democracy needs to be constantly confronted. And notably, because one aspect is undeniable. It's technology evolves. Technology evolves. So the tools they had in the ancient Greece are not the same tools we have today. So actually, we have many other tools that can make democracy much more strong, and much more useful. So the first thing to say is, let's not take democracy as granted. And second, just to make it short, because I see people is standing, let's be a bit self-criticism too. If democracy is only, there is a Republican perspective. If you talk about civic republicanism, there is one idea that to me makes a lot of sense. Democracy is useful based on the principle of trust, of confidence, of mutual confidence, institution versus society, people versus institution. When this trust is broken, when the people do not trust in the institution, or when the institution do not trust people, democracy is at risk. And that is what is happening. So if you perceive that the institutions are basically there, let me use that word, to, let's say, to make my life hard. If my perception individually is that the institutions are here to prosecute me, to make my life more difficult, not to make my life easier or better, but to complicate my life, this, let's say, this contract, this social contract, this confidence, this trust contract breaks down, and the institutions fail. And this is not necessarily true, but if the perception is that one, then we have to rethink why this happens. And this is something that the European politics is very much, let's say, responsible of. Because the way, the process, the mechanism to adopt some regulations, some rules, are too many times, too often, very obscure, very dark, very, let's say, little transparent. So once you realize that there is something that is affecting you, then you get shocked. But if you are part of the process of creating that regulation, then you are more keen to admit it, to accept it. That is basically how participative is a democracy. The more participative is a democracy, the more reliable are the institutions, the more disposed are the people to accept the norms adopted by the institutions. The less participatory that is an institution, obviously the less participatory the population will be. And this is not only important for the European institutions, it's basically important also for the local municipalities. So at the end, we are living in a moment we have a lot of technology, a lot of means, a lot of ways, a lot of tools that make us participate much more in politics than it happened 20, 50, 100 years ago. And obviously in the ancient Greece, needless to say. But this is why actually we are living a risk of credibility. So the main risk to me is not that the people vote one way or the other way. The more risky scenario is when the people stop voting. To me, is much more dangerous to see that the people is not caring, is not feeling committed, is not feeling, let's say, part of the process, than the fact that you vote one thing or the other. Obviously, I might prefer to vote one way than the other. That is obvious. But to me, it's more risky when the people decides, this is nothing to do with me. There we have a problem. Do not forget how many people voted in the US elections when Trump was elected. Do not forget how the abstentions in all the elections, notably the European ones, are happening. This is a signal. This is not, let's say, the problem. What is the problem? Sometimes the problem is blaming the people. Is saying the people is not right. The right question that we have to ask ourselves is, why is this happening? And one of the reasons why the people is perceiving that way is because they feel, so I said, unlistened, unheard, unnamed by the institutions. When this happens, there is a red line, there is an alarm that we have to listen. So from that perspective, to make a long story short, democracy needs to be reinvented every day. Not by them, not by others, not by the politicians, but everybody, but us, but we.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we can leave it here. Thank you very much, Raül. It was a pleasure to listen to your insightful and thought-provoking talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.